Sometimes the man you become is the one you are when no one knows your name. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth across the quiet stretch of countryside, a place where time didn't rush and no one checked stock prices before breakfast, a place where a man could disappear if he wanted to. And tonight, someone had. Just off a narrow gravel road, a black luxury SUV sat crooked beside a shallow ditch, its engine silent, its headlights dimmed to a fading glow, as if it had exhaled its last breath and given up on being seen. And for a moment, it looked like nothing more than an expensive mistake left behind in the wrong world. A mile away, Lily Brooks stepped out onto her small wooden porch, pulling her light jacket tighter around her shoulders as the evening air cooled faster than she expected, her boots tapping softly against the worn planks as she paused, listening. Because out here, silence meant something, and when it broke, you noticed. She tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing toward the distant tree line, where something felt off. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet shift in the rhythm of the night, like a skipped heartbeat. Most people would have ignored it. Most people would have gone back inside, poured a glass of sweet tea, and turned on the TV. But Lily wasn't most people. She stepped off the porch, her boots sinking lightly into the dirt path as she followed the sound she couldn't quite explain, guided more by instinct than logic, moving past the old fence line, past the rusted mailbox that hadn't been used in years, and toward the edge of the woods where shadows stretched long and uncertain. When she reached the road, her breath caught just slightly at the sight of the SUV, its sleek, polished frame completely out of place among the dust and gravel, like someone had dropped a piece of the city into a world that didn't want it. "Hello," she called out, her voice steady but cautious, stepping closer, her hand brushing lightly against the cool metal of the vehicle as she glanced through the window, seeing nothing but empty leather seats and a faint reflection of her own concerned expression staring back at her. The driver's door was ajar. That's when she heard it. A soft sound, barely there, like someone shifting against leaves, just beyond the edge of the trees. Lily turned quickly, her heart picking up just enough to remind her that she was alone, but she didn't hesitate. She stepped off the road and into the woods, pushing past low branches and uneven ground until she saw him. He was leaning against the base of a tree, his shirt slightly dirt-streaked, his breathing slow but uneven, as if his body hadn't decided whether to rest or keep fighting, his eyes half open but unfocused, like he was caught somewhere between waking and dreaming. For a second, Lily just stood there, taking in the scene, trying to make sense of it. He didn't look like he belonged here. Not because of his clothes, though they were clearly expensive, but because of the way he held himself even in that moment, like someone used to control, someone used to being in charge, and now wasn't. "Hey," she said softly, stepping closer and kneeling down beside him, her voice gentler now, less cautious, more certain. "Can you hear me?" His eyes shifted toward her, confusion flickering across his face like a shadow passing over light. He started, his voice rough, unfamiliar even to himself. "I don't know." Lily frowned slightly, her brows pulling together as she studied him more closely. "Do you know your name?" she asked, keeping her tone calm, steady, the way you talk to someone who's standing on uncertain ground. He hesitated, not because he didn't want to answer, but because the answer wasn't there. "No," he said quietly, the word landing heavier than it should have. Lily's breath slowed, her mind already shifting into action, not panic, not fear, just a simple decision forming the way it always did when something needed to be done. She glanced back toward the road, then down at him again, at the faint tremble in his hands, at the lost look in his eyes that didn't match the man he seemed to be. "Okay," she said, nodding once, as if confirming something to herself more than to him. "Then we'll figure it out." She reached for his arm carefully, steadying him as he tried to sit up, her movements patient, practiced in a way that didn't come from training but from a life where helping others wasn't a choice. It was just normal. "You're not staying out here tonight," she added, her voice soft but firm. "Not like this." He looked at her again, really looked this time, as if trying to understand why a stranger would care, why she hadn't walked away, why she was still there when she didn't have to be. And for the first time since he opened his eyes, something shifted in his expression, not clarity, not recognition, but something close to trust. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the trees, beyond the quiet road, beyond the life he couldn't remember, the world he came from was already starting to look for him. But here, in this small, forgotten corner of nowhere, none of that mattered yet, because for the first time in a long time, Ethan Carter, though he didn't know it, was about to meet the only person who would ever see him before he became himself again. The first thing he noticed was the smell of coffee, strong and slightly burnt, the kind that had been poured too many times from the same pot, but somehow still felt comforting, real. And when his eyes slowly opened, it was not the polished ceiling of a penthouse or the cold precision of a hospital room that greeted him, but a simple wooden ceiling with faint cracks running like quiet stories across its surface, sunlight slipping through thin curtains and resting gently on his face as if it had nowhere else to be. And for a moment, he just stared, unmoving, trying to understand where he was and why nothing felt familiar except the strange calm sitting in his chest. He shifted slightly and winced, not from sharp pain but from the stiffness of a body that had been through something it could not yet explain. And that was when he saw her again, moving quietly across the small kitchen just a few feet away, her hair loosely tied back, her sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee into a chipped ceramic mug as if this was just another ordinary morning. Lily glanced over her shoulder and noticed him awake, her expression softening almost instantly, not surprised, not alarmed, just relieved in a quiet, grounded way that did not ask for attention. "Good," she said gently, setting the mug down on the table before walking over, her boots barely making a sound against the worn wooden floor. "I was starting to think you would sleep through half the day." He blinked, pushing himself up slowly, his movements careful, uncertain, like someone learning how to exist again in a body that did not feel entirely like his own. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice still rough but clearer than before. And this time, he heard it, really heard it, as if it belonged to someone else. Lily leaned lightly against the edge of the table, crossing her arms in a relaxed way that somehow made everything feel less overwhelming. "My house," she replied simply, as if there was no need to complicate it. "About a mile from where I found you." He frowned slightly, trying to hold on to the word found, trying to pull something from it, some memory, some connection, but it slipped through his mind like water through open hands. "I do not remember," he admitted quietly, his eyes dropping for a moment, not out of shame but confusion, a deep, unsettling kind that made the world feel slightly off balance. Lily nodded once, as if she had already accepted that before he said it. "Yeah," she said, her tone calm, steady. "You mentioned that last night too." She reached for the mug and handed it to him, her fingers brushing his for just a second, warm, grounding, real. "Drink this. It might help." He took it without thinking, the heat settling into his hands, anchoring him in a way nothing else had yet. And when he brought it to his lips, the taste was simple, unfiltered, nothing like the precision he would have expected from his old life, whatever that was, and yet it felt right. "Thank you," he said, the words coming naturally even if everything else did not. Lily gave a small shrug, brushing it off as if kindness was not something worth pointing out. "You were not exactly in a position to make it back to wherever you came from," she said, glancing briefly toward the window where the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. "And there is no hospital within 20 miles, so this was the best option." He followed her gaze, noticing for the first time just how quiet everything was. No distant sirens, no hum of traffic, just the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint sound of something mechanical far off in the distance. Maybe a tractor, maybe nothing important at all. "I should go," he said suddenly, the instinct rising before the reasoning, like a reflex his body remembered even if his mind did not. Lily raised an eyebrow slightly, not challenging him, just observing. "Go where?" she asked, not unkindly. He opened his mouth, ready to answer, ready to say something that made sense, but nothing came. No address, no name, no direction, just silence. His grip on the mug tightened slightly, as that realization settled in deeper than before. "I do not know," he admitted again, softer this time, the weight of it heavier now that it had been said twice. Lily watched him for a moment, not with pity, not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet understanding that came from knowing what it felt like to not have easy answers. "Then maybe," she said slowly, pushing off the table and walking toward the door. You do not need to rush it. She opened the door and sunlight poured in, brighter now, filling the small space with warmth as she stepped outside and motioned for him to follow. After a brief hesitation, he set the mug down and stood, moving carefully but more steadily this time, drawn toward the light, toward something he could not explain. When he stepped out onto the porch, the view stopped him. Rolling fields stretched out in front of him, green and gold under the wide open sky. A dirt road winding lazily through the land, as if it had no destination it needed to reach. And in that moment, something shifted again, not memory, not recognition, but something quieter, something deeper. It is not much, Lily said from beside him, leaning against the railing as she looked out over the land she had known her whole life. But it is enough. He looked at her, then back at the fields, the simplicity of it all settling into him in a way that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. What if I never remember? He asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it, honest, unguarded. Lily did not answer right away. She just watched the horizon for a moment, then glanced at him with a small, almost knowing smile. Then you get to decide who you are anyway, she said, as if that was not something to fear, but something to choose. And for the first time since he woke up, the uncertainty in his chest did not feel like something closing in on him, but something opening instead. By late afternoon, the rhythm of the place had started to settle into him. Not all at once, not in some dramatic shift, but slowly, quietly, like something that had always been there waiting for him to notice it. And it began with the smallest things, the way Lily moved through her day without rushing, without checking a clock every few minutes. The way she tied her boots before stepping outside as if she had done it the exact same way 1,000 times before, and the way she handed him a second cup of coffee without asking, already knowing he would want it. You cannot just stand there all day, she said lightly, glancing at him over her shoulder as she grabbed a worn canvas bag from the hook by the door. If you are staying, you are helping. He raised an eyebrow slightly, not offended, just curious, as if the idea of helping with something so simple felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Helping with what? He asked, following her outside where the sun hung lower now, casting long shadows across the open land. Lily nodded toward a small garden patch just beyond the house, rows of vegetables stretching out in neat lines that looked both carefully planned and naturally imperfect at the same time. With that, she said, handing him a pair of gloves that had clearly seen better days. Unless you prefer sitting and thinking about things you cannot remember. He hesitated for only a second before taking them, the rough fabric fitting awkwardly around his hands as he pulled them on. The gesture simple, but somehow significant, like he was stepping into a role he did not recognize, but was willing to try. The soil was warm beneath his fingers as he knelt beside her, the scent of earth rising up with every movement, grounding him in a way that felt almost unfamiliar in its simplicity. And as he worked, carefully pulling weeds the way she showed him, something strange happened, something he did not expect. His mind grew quiet. Not empty, not lost, just quiet, as if the constant pressure to remember had eased for a moment, replaced by something steadier, something real. You are thinking too much, Lily said after a while, not looking at him, her focus still on the small plants she was tending. You can tell. He let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, though it did not quite reach his lips. I do not know how not to, he admitted, brushing dirt from his gloves as he sat back slightly, glancing out at the open fields again. Lily shrugged, like it was not a complicated problem. Then stop trying to remember everything, she said simply. Just remember what is in front of you. He looked at her then, really looked, noticing the calm certainty in her expression, the way she spoke as if life did not need to be figured out all at once, and for a moment, he wondered what it would be like to believe that. You make it sound easy, he said quietly. She smiled just a little, not in a way that dismissed him, but in a way that understood more than she was saying. It is not easy, she replied, standing up and brushing the dirt from her hands. It is just simpler. The rest of the afternoon passed in that same quiet rhythm, working, moving, existing without the weight of expectations he could not even name. And by the time the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and soft gold, he realized something else. He was not thinking about leaving anymore. They sat on the porch later, the air cooling again as the light faded, A glass of water in his hand this time instead of coffee, the wooden steps creaking softly beneath their weight as they leaned back and watched the horizon shift into evening. "Do you ever want to leave?" he asked after a while, the question coming from a place he did not fully understand yet. Lily tilted her head slightly, considering it, her gaze still fixed on the distant line where the land met the sky. "I used to," she said honestly. "When I was younger, I thought there had to be more out there, something bigger, something better." He nodded slowly, that idea feeling familiar in a way that made his chest tighten just slightly, like it was tied to a memory just out of reach. "And now?" he asked. She glanced at him then, her expression softer than before, but also stronger, more certain. "Now I think bigger is not always better," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Sometimes it is just louder." He looked down at his hands, still faintly marked with dirt, and for the first time, he did not feel the urge to clean them right away, did not feel the need to fix something that was not broken. "What if I was someone important?" he asked suddenly, the thought slipping out before he could stop it, not out of arrogance, but curiosity, a question more than a statement. Lily did not react the way he expected. She did not laugh, did not dismiss it, did not even look surprised. She just leaned back slightly and studied him for a moment, like she was trying to see something beneath the surface. "Important to who?" she asked. He opened his mouth to answer, but again, nothing came, because the truth was, he did not know, and that answer felt more honest than anything else he could have said. Lily nodded once, like that was enough. "Then maybe it does not matter," she said gently, turning her gaze back to the fading light. "Not right now." The sky darkened slowly, stars beginning to appear one by one, quiet and steady, and as he sat there beside her, in a place that did not know his name, in a moment that did not ask anything from him, he realized something he could not explain, for the first time in what felt like forever, even without his past, even without answers. He did not feel lost, he just felt here. The next morning arrived without urgency, sunlight stretching slowly across the wooden floor as if it had nowhere else to be. And for a moment, he lay still, listening, not to noise, not to chaos, but to something quieter, the distant hum of life that did not demand anything from him, the faint creak of the house settling, the soft movement of wind brushing against the walls, and it felt different from the world he could not remember. Not because it was better or worse, but because it asked less and gave more in return. When he stepped outside, Lily was already there, kneeling beside a worn pickup truck with the hood lifted, her hands darkened with grease as she leaned in, focused, determined, completely at ease in a situation that would have unsettled most people. "You ever fix an engine before?" she asked without looking up, her tone casual, as if the answer did not really matter. He paused for a second, watching her, the way she moved with quiet confidence, the way she trusted her own hands more than anything else. "I do not know," he admitted, stepping closer, drawn in by curiosity rather than obligation. Lily smirked slightly, glancing up at him for just a second. "Well, that is becoming a pattern," she said, then nodded toward the open space beside her. "Grab that wrench." He reached for it, the metal cool against his palm, unfamiliar yet not entirely foreign, and as he crouched beside her, something shifted again, not a memory, not a clear image, but a flicker, a sensation, like he had done something similar before, somewhere else, in another life he could not quite reach. "Here," Lily said, guiding his hand gently. "Loosen that bolt, but not too fast, or you will strip it." He followed her instructions carefully, his movements slow at first, then more confident as the resistance gave way and the bolt turned under his grip, and for a brief second, there was something like satisfaction, simple, immediate, earned. "See," she said, sitting back slightly and wiping her hands on a rag. "Not everything requires a memory." He looked at the engine, then at his hands, then back at her, something thoughtful settling in his expression. "It feels like I should know more," he said quietly, not frustrated, just aware of the gap between what he felt and what he could actually recall. Lily shrugged, leaning back against the truck tire. "Maybe you do," she replied. "It just is not important right now." He let that sit for a moment, the idea that knowledge did not always equal importance, that there were things worth knowing and things worth letting go, even if you did not choose to forget them. The morning moved forward in that same steady rhythm, fixing small things, carrying tools, learning through doing instead of remembering. And by the time the sun climbed higher, warming the air and casting shorter shadows, he realized something else. He was no longer just reacting, he was participating. Later, they walked into town, a short distance down the dirt road that curved gently between open fields and scattered fences, the kind of place where people waved even if they did not know you, where conversations started without introductions and ended without expectations. As they passed a small general store, an older man standing by the entrance tipped his hat toward Lily. "Morning, Lily," he called out, his voice warm, familiar. "You got yourself some company?" Lily nodded lightly, not slowing her pace. "Just helping him get back on his feet," she replied. Simple, direct, nothing more than that. The man looked at him then, eyes sharp but not unkind, as if measuring something without judgment. "Well, anyone who can keep up with her is doing all right," he said with a faint smile before turning back to his work. He glanced at Lily, a question forming without words. "They do not ask questions here?" he said after a moment. Lily shook her head slightly. "Not the kind that make people uncomfortable," she answered, her tone steady. "Out here, if you need help, you get help. The rest comes later." They stopped near a small wooden bench overlooking a quiet stretch of land where a few children were playing in the distance, their laughter carrying softly through the air, light, unforced, real. He sat down, watching them, something in his chest tightening in a way he could not explain, not pain, not sadness, just something deeper, something connected to a life he could not see. "Do you think they are happier?" he asked, almost to himself, his gaze still fixed on the scene in front of him. Lily followed his line of sight, her expression thoughtful but not distant. "I think they do not spend as much time trying to be something else," she said, her voice calm, certain, "and that leaves more room to just be." He let out a slow breath, leaning back slightly, letting the warmth of the sun settle over him, letting the simplicity of the moment sink in deeper than anything else had so far. And for a second, everything felt aligned, not because he had answers, but because he was no longer searching for them every second. But then, just as quietly as everything else had happened, something broke that stillness, a distant sound cutting through the calm, low at first, then growing, unfamiliar in this quiet place, mechanical, sharp against the natural rhythm of the village. Lily's head lifted slightly, her brows pulling together just a fraction as she looked toward the horizon. He followed her gaze, his body reacting before his mind could catch up, something instinctive, something buried deep beneath the surface stirring for the first time since he arrived. "That is not from around here," she said softly, more to herself than to him. As the sound grew louder, closer, and for reasons he could not explain, his heart began to beat just a little faster, not from fear, not from panic, but from recognition of something just out of reach, something that was finally starting to find him. The sound did not belong to this place, and the moment it cut through the quiet, everything else seemed to fall back, as if the land itself was listening, waiting, and the low mechanical hum grew louder, clearer, until it was no longer distant but approaching, steady and deliberate, like something that knew exactly where it was going. He stood slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his body reacting before his thoughts could catch up, a strange tension building in his chest, not fear, not exactly, but recognition, the kind that lived deeper than memory, the kind that did not need explanation. Lily remained seated for a moment longer, watching him instead of the road, noticing the shift in him, the way his posture changed, the way his shoulders straightened just slightly, like something inside him had been quietly waiting for this moment. "You feel that too?" she asked softly, her voice calm but curious, and he nodded without looking at her, his focus still locked on the approaching sound. "I do not know what it is," he said slowly, "but it feels familiar." The hum grew into something sharper now, the distinct rhythm of rotating blades cutting through the air, and then it appeared, rising over the distant tree line, a helicopter, dark against the bright sky, moving with purpose as it descended toward the open field just beyond the road. Dust and loose grass lifted into the air as it lowered, the wind pushing outward in strong, controlled waves that disrupted the stillness of the village in a way nothing else had since he arrived. Lily stood then, brushing her hands lightly against her jeans, her expression tightening just slightly, not in fear, but an awareness that something had just crossed into their quiet world that did not belong. "That is definitely not local," she said, her tone quieter now, more measured, as she stepped closer to him, her eyes moving between the helicopter and his face. He did not respond right away. He could not, because as the machine settled onto the ground and the blades began to slow, something inside him shifted again, stronger this time, sharper, like a door in his mind cracking open just enough to let something through. A flash, quick and incomplete, a glass building reflecting sunlight, voices speaking over one another, the weight of decisions that carried more than just consequences. And then it was gone, leaving behind only the echo of something he could not fully grasp. The helicopter door opened, and two men stepped out, both dressed in dark suits that looked impossibly out of place against the dust and open land, their movements precise, controlled, their attention scanning the area until it landed on him. And when it did, everything changed. "Sir," one of them called out, his voice firm but respectful, carrying easily across the distance. "We have been looking everywhere for you." The words hit him before he understood them, before he could process what they meant, but his body reacted instantly, a subtle shift, a stillness that was not hesitation but recognition, like a part of him had been waiting to hear exactly that. Lily glanced at him, her brows pulling together slightly, confusion mixing with something else, something she had not felt until now. "Do you know them?" she asked, her voice quieter, more careful, as if the answer might change everything. He opened his mouth, searching for certainty, but all he had were fragments, sensations, pieces that did not quite connect, and yet. "I think they know me," he said slowly, his eyes still fixed on the men approaching, each step they took closing the distance between two very different worlds. The second man stepped forward slightly, holding something in his hand, a small object that caught the sunlight just enough to draw attention. And as he came closer, it became clear, a watch, sleek, expensive, unmistakably out of place here. "We found this in the vehicle, sir," the man said, his tone steady, offering it forward with both hands, as if it carried more than just time. The moment his eyes landed on it, something clicked, not fully, not completely, but enough. His breath caught just slightly as an image flashed in his mind, his own hand adjusting the strap, the weight of it familiar against his wrist, the quiet understanding that this was not just an accessory. It was a symbol, a piece of a life that existed beyond this place. Slowly, almost without thinking, he reached out and took it, his fingers closing around the cool metal, and in that instant, the calm he had found over the past days wavered, just enough to let something else through, something heavier, something tied to responsibility, to expectation, to a version of himself that was starting to come back. Lily watched him closely, her eyes moving from the watch to his face, reading the change even before he spoke, even before he understood it himself. "What is it?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost careful, as if she was afraid of the answer. He looked down at the watch, then back at the men, then finally at her, and for the first time since she found him in the woods, there was something different in his eyes, something sharper, more defined, like the edges of who he was were beginning to return. "I do not remember everything," he said slowly, his voice steady but no longer uncertain, "but I think I was not just passing through." And as the wind from the fading blades moved gently across the field, carrying dust and silence in equal measure, the life he had been living without knowing it began to rise again, piece by piece. And the question was no longer who he had been, but who he would choose to become now that both worlds were standing right in front of him. The moment the watch settled into his palm, the world around him seemed to shift in ways no one else could see, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable, like a quiet current pulling him towards something he had once known too well. And as his fingers traced the smooth edge of the metal, more fragments began to surface. Not full memories, not clear stories, just flashes, a long conference table stretching beneath bright lights. Voices layered with urgency, a city skyline reflected in glass that reached higher than anything in this village ever could. And then the feeling, the weight of expectation, of decisions that affected more than just himself, and his breath slowed, not from calm, but from realization. "Ethan Carter," one of the men said, his voice steady, respectful, but carrying a certainty that did not ask for confirmation. You are the chief executive officer of Carter Holdings. The name landed in the air between them, heavy, unfamiliar, and yet strangely fitting, like a suit tailored for a man he was just beginning to remember. He did not respond immediately, not because he did not hear it, but because part of him was still catching up, still trying to reconcile the man he had been here with the man they were describing. Lily stood beside him, silent now, her gaze shifting between his face and the men in front of them, her expression no longer just curious, but searching, as if she was trying to understand how someone who had spent the last few days learning how to pull weeds and fix a truck could also be the person they were describing. "We need to get you back, sir," the second man added, his tone more urgent, though still controlled. "There are meetings that have been delayed, decisions that cannot wait any longer, and the board is expecting you." Board, meetings, decisions. Each word felt heavier than the last, like pieces of a structure rising around him, something familiar, something powerful, something that had once defined him completely. He looked down at the watch again, then slowly lifted his gaze toward the horizon, toward the fields that had become his world for the past few days, the simplicity of it all now standing in sharp contrast to the life they were pulling him back into. "How long?" he asked quietly, his voice steady but distant, as if he was asking about someone else's life. 3 days, sir," the first man replied without hesitation. "You were reported missing after your vehicle was found abandoned, and we have been searching non-stop since then." 3 days. It felt like more. It felt like something had stretched time, reshaped it, given him something he had not realized he was missing until now. Lily shifted slightly beside him, her arms crossing loosely as she processed what she had just heard, her mind connecting the pieces faster than her emotions were ready to accept. "So you are, what, some big city executive?" she asked, her voice careful, not accusing, but not as easy as before. He turned to her then, really turned, and for the first time since he had woken up in her house, there was something in his expression that had not been there before, something sharper, more defined, but also more conflicted. "I think I am more than that," he said slowly, the words chosen with care. "But I do not know if that is all I am anymore." The men exchanged a brief glance, subtle but noticeable, as if they were not used to hearing uncertainty from him, as if the version of Ethan Carter they knew did not hesitate, did not question, did not stand in the middle of a field weighing two completely different lives against each other. "Sir," the second man said again, stepping forward slightly, "the helicopter is ready, and we should leave as soon as possible." The urgency in his voice did not come from fear, but from expectation, from a world that moved quickly and did not wait, a world that assumed he would step back into it without question. He looked at the helicopter, then back at the house in the distance, then finally at Lily, and in that moment, everything felt suspended, like the next decision would define not just what he did, but who he was going to be. "Do you want to go?" Lily asked quietly, her voice softer now, not pushing, not pulling, just asking the question that mattered most. He held her gaze for a long second, searching for something, not in her, but in himself, and what he found was not clarity, not certainty, but something more honest, something simpler. "I do not know," he admitted, and this time, the uncertainty did not sound like weakness, it sounded like truth. Lily nodded once, as if that answer made more sense than anything else he could have said, her expression steady, but no longer as open as before, something shifting beneath the surface, something she was not ready to name yet. "Then maybe," she said slowly, her eyes flicking briefly toward the helicopter before returning to him, "you need to figure out which life feels more like you." The wind picked up slightly as the blades above the helicopter began to turn again, slower this time, but enough to remind everyone that time was moving, that decisions were coming whether they were ready or not. And as Ethan stood there, between the world that had come to reclaim him and the one that had quietly changed him, he realized that remembering who he was might not be the hardest part. Choosing who he wanted to be, that was where everything truly began. The wind did not wait for his decision. It moved anyway, brushing past his face, tugging lightly at his shirt, carrying with it the distant echo of a life that was calling him back whether he was ready or not. And as the blades of the helicopter began to turn faster, the quiet rhythm of the village started to fade beneath the growing noise, replaced by something sharper, more urgent, something that belonged to the world he had once lived in without question. Ethan looked at Lily one last time before stepping forward. Not quickly, not confidently, but with a kind of quiet acceptance that came from knowing that some choices could not be avoided forever. "I need to understand," he said, his voice steady but low, as if the words were meant more for himself than for her. "I cannot choose anything if I do not know what I am leaving behind." Lily did not stop him. She did not reach out or argue or try to hold him. There, and that was what made it harder, not easier. She just nodded once, her expression calm but distant in a way it had not been before. "Then go," she said softly, her eyes holding his for just a second longer. "But do not forget what you found here, even if you forget everything else again." He paused at that, something tightening in his chest, but before he could respond, before he could say anything that might make leaving feel less final, he turned and walked toward the helicopter, each step pulling him further away from the version of himself he had started to become. The men moved quickly as he approached, opening the door, guiding him inside with practiced efficiency, their movements familiar in a way that did not need explanation. And as he stepped into the aircraft, the world shifted again, the air different, the space tighter, controlled, everything designed for function, not comfort. He glanced back once, just once, and saw her standing there, small against the wide open field, her arms resting loosely at her sides, not reaching out, not calling after him, just watching, and something about that image stayed with him longer than anything else had. Then the door closed, the sound of the blades intensified, and the ground began to fall away beneath him. The village shrank quickly, the dirt road becoming a thin line, the house disappearing into the patchwork of green and gold, and within minutes, it was gone, replaced by distance and sky. Inside the helicopter, everything felt different, faster, sharper, the men speaking into headsets, coordinating, updating, moving forward without hesitation, as if the world they belonged to had been paused and was now rushing to catch up. "We have rerouted your schedule, sir," one of them said, handing him a tablet filled with information, numbers, meetings, names, responsibilities layered one over the other in a way that should have felt overwhelming, but instead felt familiar. Ethan looked down at the screen, his eyes scanning the details, and with each line, more fragments returned, not all at once, but enough to understand the scale of the life he had stepped back into. Deals worth millions, decisions affecting thousands, expectations that did not allow for hesitation. "This is what I do," he asked quietly, though part of him already knew the answer. "This is who you are," the man corrected gently, as if there was a difference that mattered. Ethan leaned back slightly, his grip tightening just a little on the edge of the tablet, and for a moment, he let the information settle, let the weight of it press against the calm he had found in the village, and the contrast was undeniable. By the time the helicopter touched down again, the world had changed completely. Glass buildings stretched into the sky, reflecting light in sharp, controlled angles, streets filled with movement, noise, purpose, everything operating at a pace that did not leave room for stillness. As he stepped out, a car was already waiting. The door opened before he reached it, and without a word, he got in, carried forward by a momentum that felt both natural and distant at the same time. Hours passed in a blur of conversations, meetings, decisions, each one pulling him deeper into the role he had once mastered, and with every step, every word, the man he had been there reassembled itself piece by piece. Confident, decisive, controlled, and yet, beneath all of it, something did not fit the same way anymore. Late that evening, he stood alone in an office high above the city, the skyline stretching endlessly in front of him, lights flickering like signals in a world that never truly rested, and in his hand, the watch gleamed under the soft glow of the room, polished, precise, perfect. He turned it slowly, watching the reflection shift across its surface, and for a moment, he saw something else, not the city, not the glass, but a small wooden porch, a quiet field, a girl standing still as he walked away without looking back. His jaw tightened just slightly as he slipped the watch onto his wrist, the weight settling into place like it always had, like it was meant to be there, and yet it felt different now, heavier somehow, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. "Sir, your final meeting for the day is ready," a voice said from the doorway, pulling him back into the present, back into the world that knew exactly who he was supposed to be. Ethan nodded once, his expression composed, controlled, the version of himself they expected fully in place as he turned away from the window and walked toward the door. But as he did, one thought stayed with him, quiet but persistent, not loud enough to interrupt, but strong enough to remain. For the first time in his life, success did not feel like an answer. It felt like a question he was not sure he wanted to keep answering. The city did not slow down for doubt. It moved forward with or without him. And over the next few days, Ethan found himself pulled deeper into a rhythm that once defined him completely. Meetings stacked back to back, decisions made in minutes that would ripple across entire industries. People watching him closely, waiting for direction, expecting certainty, and he gave it to them. The same way he always had, sharp, precise, controlled, as if the version of him that had stood in a quiet field, questioning everything had never existed at all. This acquisition will position us ahead of the market for the next decade, one executive said, pointing at a glowing screen filled with projections and numbers that climbed higher with every explanation. We just need your approval to finalize. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable, his fingers resting lightly against the polished surface of the table, and for a moment, everything was exactly as it used to be, predictable, structured, efficient, the kind of world where every decision had a measurable outcome, every action a clear purpose. But then, just as quickly, something else surfaced, uninvited but undeniable, a memory not of numbers or strategy, but of dirt beneath his hands, of sunlight stretching across a quiet porch, of a voice asking him a simple question he still had not answered. "Who are you when you have nothing, sir?" the executive prompted gently, pulling him back to the present. Ethan blinked once, his focus sharpening again, but not in the same way. "No," he said calmly, his voice steady but firm. "We are not moving forward with this." The room went still, not silent, but noticeably different, like something had shifted just enough to be felt by everyone present. "May I ask why?" another voice said carefully, confusion slipping through the professionalism. Ethan's gaze moved across the table, meeting each set of eyes with a calm that did not need to explain itself immediately. "Because not everything that looks like growth is worth the cost," he replied, his tone even, but carrying a weight that had nothing to do with profit margins. The meeting continued, but something had changed, not just in the room, but in him, and by the time it ended, the decision had been accepted, even if it was not fully understood. Later that evening, he stood once again by the window of his office, the city alive beneath him, lights stretching endlessly into the distance, a world built on ambition, speed, and constant motion, and yet, for the first time, it felt distant, like something he could see clearly but no longer fully connect to. His phone buzzed softly in his hand, a new message lighting up the screen, another meeting, another request, another piece of a life that demanded everything and gave very little in return. He stared at it for a moment, then slowly lowered it, letting the silence of the room settle around him instead. His eyes drifted to the watch on his wrist, the same one that had once symbolized everything he had built, everything he had achieved, and he turned it slightly, watching the light reflect across its surface, sharp and controlled, just like the life it represented. But then, almost without thinking, he closed his eyes, and the image changed, replaced by something softer, something quieter, something real. A small house, a worn porch, a girl who had looked at him not as a title, not as a name, but as a person who did not need to be anything more than present. His hand tightened slightly around the watch, and for the first time since he had put it back on, it felt heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. "Sir," his assistant's voice came from the doorway, hesitant this time, as if even she could sense the shift. "Your car is ready." Ethan opened his eyes slowly, the city coming back into focus, the glass, the lights, the distance, and he nodded once, but did not move right away. Instead, he reached up and unfastened the watch, holding it in his hand for a moment longer before setting it down gently on the desk in front of him. The action was small, almost insignificant to anyone else, but to him, it felt like something much larger, something that could not be undone. "Cancel my meetings for tomorrow," he said quietly, his voice calm, but leaving no room for argument. The assistant blinked, surprised, but nodded quickly. Yes, sir. As the door closed behind her, the room fell silent again. But this time, it was not the kind of silence that followed a long day. It was the kind that came before a decision that would change everything. Ethan reached for his phone again, but instead of opening another message or reviewing another schedule, he searched for something else, something simpler, something that did not belong to this world. A location, a place without an address he could easily explain, but one he could still see clearly in his mind. And without hesitation, he made the call. Get the helicopter ready, he said, his voice steady, certain in a way it had not been before. We are going back. The helicopter cut through the early morning sky with a steady rhythm that felt different this time. Not urgent, not searching, but certain, like it already knew where it was meant to go. And as the landscape shifted beneath him from steel and glass to open fields and quiet roads, something inside Ethan settled in a way it had not since he first left, a calm that did not come from control, but from clarity. He did not check his phone, did not review schedules, did not ask for updates, because for the first time in a long time, there was nothing else pulling at him, nothing demanding his attention except the place he was returning to and the person who had changed everything without trying to. When the helicopter began its descent, the familiar stretch of land came back into view, the same dirt road, the same open fields, unchanged, steady, as if time had not moved at all while he had been gone. And as the blade slowed and the dust lifted once again into the air, he did not wait for assistance, did not pause. He stepped out immediately, his eyes already searching. Lily was not on the porch this time. The space felt different without her, quieter in a way that was not peaceful, and for a brief second, something in his chest tightened, a thought he had not allowed himself to consider until now. What if she had moved on? What if this place had returned to exactly what it was before he arrived, as if he had never been part of it at all? He walked forward, each step deliberate, his gaze scanning the yard, the house, the small details that had once felt so ordinary but now carried weight. And just as that uncertainty began to grow, he saw her. She was near the garden, kneeling beside the same rows of plants, her hands moving slowly, methodically, exactly the way they had before, as if nothing had changed, as if everything had. She did not look up right away, not when the helicopter landed, not when the engine slowed, not even when he stepped closer, because she had already heard it, already knew, and she had made a choice of her own. Ethan stopped a few feet away, the distance between them small, but filled with everything that had happened since he left, everything that had not been said. I came back, he said finally, his voice steady, not loud, not uncertain, just real. Lily continued working for a moment longer, brushing the dirt from her hands before slowly standing, turning to face him with an expression that was calm, but no longer as open as it had once been, something guarded now, something careful. I can see that, she replied, her tone neutral, not cold, but not warm either, and for a second, he felt it, the shift, the difference, the space that had formed between who they were then and who they were now. He nodded once, accepting it, not trying to push past it, not trying to fix it with words that would not be enough. I remember more now, he said, taking a step closer, but stopping himself before closing the distance completely, respecting the line she had drawn without saying it out loud. Not everything, but enough. Lily crossed her arms loosely, her gaze steady on him, searching, measuring, trying to understand what had changed and what had not. Enough to go back to your world, she said quietly, not as a question, but as a statement. He held her gaze, not looking away this time, not avoiding what needed to be said. I went back, he corrected gently, but I did not stay. That caught her attention, just enough to shift something in her expression, not fully, not completely, but enough to show that she was listening. And why is that? She asked, her voice softer now, but still guarded, still careful. Ethan exhaled slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of honesty, choosing his words not to impress, not to convince, but to tell the truth. Because I realized something, he said, his eyes not leaving hers. When I had everything, I did not question who I was. I just kept going, faster, higher, further, because that is what I thought mattered. He paused for a second, letting that settle before continuing. But when I had nothing, when I did not even know my own name, that is when I felt the most like myself. The words hung between them, simple, unpolished, but real in a way that could not be mistaken. Lily looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable at first, as if she was weighing not just what he was saying, but what it meant for both of them. "And what does that have to do with me?" she asked quietly. He did not hesitate this time. "Everything," he answered, his voice steady, certain in a way it had not been before. "Because you were there when I had nothing, and you did not treat me like I was missing something, you treated me like I was enough." Something in her expression shifted then, subtle but undeniable, the guard not falling completely, but softening just enough to let something through. He reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out the watch, holding it up for a second before lowering it again, his grip relaxed, no longer defined by it. "This used to mean everything to me," he said, glancing down at it briefly before looking back at her. "But now it just reminds me of who I thought I had to be." Without breaking eye contact, he stepped closer and placed it gently on the wooden edge of the porch beside them, leaving it there, not as a rejection of his past, but as a choice about his future. "I am not here because I lost that life," he continued, his voice quiet but unwavering. "I am here because I chose this one." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had led to this moment, everything that could still change, everything that could still grow. Lily looked at the watch, then back at him, her eyes softer now, no longer guarded in the same way, but still thoughtful, still careful. "And what if this life does not choose you back?" she asked, her voice gentle but honest. Ethan smiled slightly, not confident, not certain, but real. "Then I will earn it," he said simply, the words carrying more meaning than anything else he could have offered. For a moment, neither of them moved, the world around them quiet again, the same way it had been when everything began. And then, slowly, Lily stepped forward, closing the distance just enough to change everything without saying another word. And in that small, quiet movement, in that choice to stay instead of walk away, the answer was there, not loud, not dramatic, but certain in the only way that mattered.